It was a winter night in Washington state. Snow blanketed the rooftops, and the quiet of the small town of Carnation was shattered by a 911 call.
911?
There's been a murder. There's 3 people dead that I can see right now.
Inside?
I just came up. She works with me.
Inside a house?
Yes.
What do you see?
There's a baby and a man and a woman, and she's my best friend.
Judy Anderson, a beloved woman by her entire neighborhood, was found lifeless inside her own family home. No signs of forced entry, no crying for help. Only a silent room and a fatal wound that sent a chill down the spines of responding officers. But this was only the beginning of an unprecedented tragedy. Christmas is meant to be a time of warmth and togetherness. Yet for the Anderson family, that holiday turned into the most horrifying massacre Carnation, Washington had ever seen. On December 26, 2007, Linda Tyler, worried when her close friend Judy failed to show up for work, drove to the Anderson home to check in. The door creaked open, and before her eyes was a scene that will haunt her forever. Wayne Scott Anderson and Judy Anderson. Scott Anderson and his wife, Erica Mantle Anderson, along with their 2 young children, Olivia, 5, and Nathan, 3, all brutally murdered. In a town of fewer than 2,000 people, nothing this vicious had ever happened before. What shook the community even more was the fact that Michelle Anderson, Judy's own daughter, and her boyfriend Joseph McEnroe lived just nearby. The Anderson family had always been well-liked and respected. Yet, in a single night, everything collapsed.
Seeing everybody die, remembering what I did, how worthless it is, how worthless I am because I killed all these people. They deserve to die. They deserve to live a lot more than I did, but they...
As news spread, the community was left stunned and suspicious. Who could carry out such an act against a family like this, and why?
Sorry, I did because I thought I had to. And yeah, I know that's not a very good excuse, but I'm not trying to excuse myself. I'm just trying to explain my actions. I'm sorry.
Oh, understand this tragedy. We have to go back, step into the lives of the people at the center of it all, and retrace the final hours before blood was spilled inside the Anderson family's suburban home. Carnation, Washington, a small town where everybody knows each other's face. Life here was close-knit, peaceful, until one tragedy shattered everything. Based on accounts from neighbors and friends, the Andersons seemed like the picture-perfect family. On the surface, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Wayne Scott Anderson, 60, was a longtime engineer at Boeing with a steady income. His wife, Judy, 61, worked at the local post office, a familiar face everyone adored. She was especially close to Linda Tyler, who would later be the one to call 911, bringing the entire case into the light. Linda wasn't just fond of Judy. She was friendly with the entire Anderson family. Wayne and Judy had 2 children, Scott Anderson, 32, and Michelle Anderson, 29. To those who knew them, it was understood that Scott was the favorite. He had a stable life, married to Erica Mantle with 2 young children, Olivia, 5, and Nathan, 3. Michelle, on the other hand, was different. She lived in a mobile home on her parents' property, less than 200 yards from the main house. She paid no rent, worked at Target, and was dating Joseph McEnroe. To many, Michelle was seen as the family failure, always on the fringes of her own household. Joseph McEnroe, Michelle's boyfriend, was from Santa Clara, California. He didn't grow up in Carnation, but he and Michelle had plenty in common. Neither had direction, stability, or much of a future. Joseph was described by those who knew him as quiet, reserved, a man who enjoyed video games and craved acceptance from others. He wasn't known to be aggressive. In fact, many remembered him as a harmless loner. But in reality, Joseph was unemployed, directionless, and stuck in his own life. Michelle, on the other hand, wasn't just struggling to get by. She carried a simmering resentment. Her older brother, Scott, had everything: a loving wife, 2 adorable kids, a steady job, and the unconditional support of their parents. Erica, Scott's wife, was so close to Wayne and Judy that some believed they saw her as their own daughter, something Michelle had never felt. That quiet comparison, though never spoken aloud, could slowly eat away at someone who already felt like the outsider in her own family. On the surface, the couple appeared to be just 2 lost souls. But looking closer, what was quietly forming beneath was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Joseph McEnroe struggled with crippling anxiety, to the point where even simple daily tasks became a challenge. He was easily influenced, especially under pressure, and at times he had trouble clearly telling right from wrong. That vulnerability made Joseph an easy target for manipulation, someone who could be pulled into paths he would never have taken on his own. His relationship with Michelle Anderson began in 2001, after they met through a dating site. It quickly became an intense but unhealthy bond. They depended on each other, yet instead of lifting one another up, it was as if they were dragging each other down. The couple lived in an old, worn-out trailer just a few hundred yards from Michelle's parents' home. With no steady income, they constantly struggled to cover basic expenses. Their damp, deteriorating rental mirrored the state of their lives at the time. Joseph had almost no friends, and together, they were largely isolated from the tight-knit Carnation community. Joseph McEnroe was never known for having a strong work ethic. He rarely looked for work, and when he did, he couldn't hold a job for long. Stability was nearly non-existent in the lives of Joseph McEnroe and Michelle Anderson. Michelle couldn't stop comparing herself to her parents, Wayne and Judy Anderson, who had stable finances and a secure home. But instead of feeling proud, she felt abandoned, convinced they were keeping her at arm's length on purpose. In Michelle's eyes, they hadn't done enough to help her, especially since, as she put it, they were the ones who had brought her into this world. That bitterness only deepened when, after years of letting the couple live rent-free on family land, Wayne and Judy decided to start charging rent. To Michelle, it felt like nothing short of a betrayal. Worse still, she claimed her brother, Scott, had borrowed around $40,000 from her over the years and had never made any effort to pay it back. Through it all, Michelle and Joseph remained inseparable, weathering hardship together and dreaming of one day running off to Las Vegas to get married. But before they could make that dream come true, they believed they still had a debt to settle with Wayne and Judy. In the summer of 2006, Joseph McEnroe quietly purchased 2 firearms, a Smith & Wesson Model 19 Magnum revolver and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. These weren't toys. They were tools for a deadly plan. On Christmas Eve 2007, instead of gathering with family, Michelle and Joseph drove to Wayne and Judy Anderson's home with a calculated mission. Judy was in the back room, carefully wrapping gifts for her grandchildren, trying to preserve the festive spirit, while Wayne was busy elsewhere in the house. That peaceful atmosphere was about to shatter. Joseph kept one gun tucked into his waistband, distracting Judy with small talk. Meanwhile, Michelle quietly approached her father, gun in hand. She aimed, pulled the trigger, but the weapon jammed. Panic erupted. Joseph immediately stepped in, firing a shot that killed Wayne instantly. The gunfire brought Judy running in, and she was hit almost immediately. She collapsed, crying out in pain. And in a chilling moment, Joseph whispered an apology before pressing the gun to her head and pulling the trigger. The parents were dead, but their plan wasn't over yet. Scott, Erica, and the children could arrive at any moment. They hurriedly dragged the bodies into a nearby shed, wiping the blood with cloths and chemicals, desperately trying to erase the traces of a Christmas that had turned into a nightmare. Michelle and Joseph tried to clean up the blood, to hide everything, but the silence wouldn't last. Just 45 minutes after the shooting, Scott, his wife Erica, and the kids walked into the house. Right at the door, Michelle was waiting. Without a word of warning, she drew her gun and lunged at her brother. In a desperate attempt to protect his family, Scott charged forward. But Michelle fired 4 shots in rapid succession. One bullet tore through his neck, ending his life instantly. Erica was hit twice, but still alive. Blood soaked her clothes, her breathing heavy. She knew she had to act before the children became the next victims. Nearby, a cordless phone lay abandoned. Erica crawled toward the sofa for cover, trembling as she grabbed the phone and dialed 911. She only managed to hold the line for a few seconds before Joseph appeared, snatching the phone from her hands. On the other end, the operator heard nothing but muffled screams and chaotic, indistinct noise. With no clear information, she assumed it was a family gathering that had gone out of control, but still dispatched 2 officers to check the scene. Joseph ripped the phone apart, removed the battery, and crushed it underfoot. Erica pleaded, her voice shaking, even screaming, "Don't hurt the children." He only responded with meaningless apologies before coldly pulling the trigger. A bullet struck her head, ending her life and closing the chapter on the second generation of the Anderson family, leaving only Michelle standing. But the nightmare wasn't over. The 2 children, only 5 and 3 years old, were still alive. To Michelle, they weren't victims. They were a threat. She was haunted by the thought that if they spoke, the entire secret would collapse in a future trial. The idea drove her to the edge of paranoia. And then, Michelle made a cold decision. They had to be silenced forever. There was only one problem. Michelle couldn't bring herself to pull the trigger. She couldn't bear the thought of hurting children herself. So she turned to Joseph. He may have been stunned by the request, but deep down, he understood the brutal reality they were both moving toward. They began to rationalize the act they were about to commit, believing the children had been irreparably damaged by what they had witnessed, that their innocence was lost forever, and perhaps freeing them would be more humane than leaving them to live in pain. Joseph acted first. He picked up Olivia, whispered an apology, and pulled the trigger. The bullet took her life before her eyes could comprehend what was happening. Nathan, only 3, sat on the floor amid the chaos. He played with the broken pieces of the phone battery, his innocence painfully obvious. But when Joseph approached, Nathan looked up, his eyes seeming to understand everything, an awareness far beyond his tender age. Joseph once said that if he could trade his life to save them, he would.
If I thought that hurting myself or killing myself or doing anything, that anything I could do would go off and bring back these people or ameliorate the pain or something, I would.
But that night, he chose another path. With a cold pull of the trigger, Nathan became the final victim, following in the footsteps of his parents and sister. Just as it ended, Michelle froze. Erica's 911 call had actually gone through. Even if only for a few seconds, it was enough to draw the attention of emergency responders. Panicked, she bolted out to the dirt road, locking the front gate tight, hoping to delay anyone from arriving too soon. Only minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. They reached the locked gate, unable to get in. Both stood silently, listening. No screams, no cries. only an unsettling silence that hung in the air. Even when they asked a nearby neighbor, the answer was the same. I didn't see or hear anything unusual. With no leads and no evidence, the police turned their backs and left. That brief moment of quiet became precious time for Michelle and Joseph to catch their breath and regain composure. But deep down, they knew they had crossed the point of no return. 6 lives had been taken, and they were the only survivors of a massacre, one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Even though they lived only a few hundred yards from the crime scene, Michelle and Joseph quickly fell under police suspicion. The question wasn't if they would be suspected, but when. Interrogations piled up, peeling back the layers of their story until the truth could no longer be hidden. They chose to run. Heading straight for the Canadian border, they hoped to vanish completely. But along the way, another thought struck them. Fleeing north might be the wrong move. Instantly, they changed course, driving west toward Oregon. A new path, a new hope, and the beginning of a new chase. That meant, on their way to escape, they had to drive right past the home of Wayne and Judy, the very place that just 2 days earlier was still a blood-soaked crime scene. No one knows if they looked back, or if they simply drove by coldly, leaving behind the consequences of what they had done. Carnation, December 26th. 2 days after the massacre, Linda Thiele, Judy's best friend, began to feel uneasy. Judy hadn't shown up at the post office as she always did, something that had never happened before. Judy was a woman of absolute punctuality, almost never missing a day. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Linda went to Judy's house. Through the window, she saw a sight no one should ever have to witness: 2 lifeless bodies lying on the floor. That moment marked the beginning of a nightmare that would engulf the entire community. As the dark secret of that bloody Christmas night started to surface, the first 2 bodies Linda saw were Scott and Erica, but in her shock and panic, she believed they were Wayne and Judy. Linda's mind spun at the sight before her. She had no idea that everyone inside the house had been executed, shot down in cold blood. Her first assumption, strange as it may sound, was a tragic accident. Perhaps they had suffered carbon monoxide poisoning. That thought was easier to accept than the truth. But when the door opened, reality hit her like a freight train. Signs of violence were everywhere. Bullet holes, dark crimson stains, the suffocating stench of death. Any illusion of an accident vanished instantly. Shaking, panicked, barely able to believe what she was seeing, Linda grabbed the phone and dialed 911, her voice breaking as she tried to describe the nightmare unfolding before her.
911?
There's been a murder. There's 3 people dead that I can see right now.
Inside?
I just came up. She works with me.
Inside the house?
Yes.
What do you see?
There's a baby and a man and a woman, and she's my best friend.
Police swarmed the scene, immediately setting up a perimeter around the house. Yellow tape sealed off the property as investigators carefully documented every detail. Neighbors gathered in silence, stunned by the nightmare unfolding before their eyes. And then, in a cruel twist of fate, Michelle and Joseph drove by. At first, they had planned to head straight for Canada, but had changed course toward Oregon. Yet something made them stop. Perhaps guilt gnawing at them, or simply the urge to see the chaos they had left behind. Whatever the reason, they pulled over and stepped out. Within seconds, police approached, and from that moment, suspicion began to flicker in the officers' eyes. Too close to the scene, too calm, and their timing suspiciously perfect. Michelle and Joseph were quickly escorted into the interrogation room. At first, they clung to a lie, an implausible story that they were on their way to Las Vegas to get married. Both of them knew no one would believe it. The weight of their crime was slowly crushing them. Michelle was the first to break. Under the blinding lights of the interrogation room, she collapsed into tears, trembling as she confessed, words spilling out between sobs. Joseph, on the other hand, stayed silent, insisting on his innocence. But silence wasn't going to save anyone. In the end, both were charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Wayne, Judy, Scott, Erica, and the 2 children, Olivia and Nathan. The investigation moved quickly, but it would take nearly 3 years before the trial began. That delay was the result of endless legal procedures, psychological evaluations, and the painstaking dissection of a mountain of evidence. By the summer of 2008, the trial finally opened. Michelle and Joseph sat in the defendants' chairs, staring down the cold gaze of the prosecutor as the horrific details of that Christmas night were laid bare once again. At first, Michelle denied everything. But piece by piece, the evidence closed in. Forensic results, phone records, and chilling witness testimony tightened the noose around her. By the end of that year, in a heavy moment before the court, Michelle broke down, sobbing on the witness stand, admitting that she was the mastermind behind the Christmas massacre. Joseph McEnroe clung to his story, claiming Michelle had manipulated him, turning him into a reluctant accomplice. But prosecutors had cards of their own. They presented evidence showing that Joseph not only knew what was happening, he actively pulled the trigger. Despite every excuse, the jury was convinced. The prosecutor's sharp arguments cut through all defenses. Both Michelle and Joseph would pay the price for an unforgivable crime. The entire community followed the trial, as if shackled to every hearing, frustration and outrage building as the months dragged on without end. In early 2009, prosecutors delivered their decisive blow. They would seek the death penalty. 6 counts of first-degree murder, the highest charge under Washington state law, meant the most brutal punishment possible. In court, they painted a portrait of 2 cold-blooded killers, utterly remorseless, who had meticulously planned and savagely executed their own family, including 2 innocent children. Public opinion swung hard toward supporting death row, a collective roar of grief and fury that consumed the community. But on January 31st, 2013, after years of tense hearings, presiding Judge Jeffrey Ramsdell dropped a bombshell. The death penalty would not be pursued. The courtroom fell silent. Based on the weight of evidence and legal procedure, Judge Ramsdell declared that life in prison without parole would be the maximum sentence. It was a stunning legal twist. Many had expected the death penalty for such a barbaric crime, but the law demanded strict adherence to fairness and due process. The long wait left part of the public frustrated, but it also underscored the complexity of seeking justice in a case of this magnitude. Once Joseph McEnroe realized death row was no longer on the table, he quickly shifted strategy. In the months following Judge Ramsdell's ruling, McEnroe pleaded guilty to all 6 counts of first-degree murder, a move designed to end any further legal battles that could stretch on for years. Yet in court, he clung to the same story, that Michelle Anderson manipulated their relationship, pulling him into the Christmas night massacre. But forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and his own chilling lack of remorse shattered that defense completely. Michelle chose to face it head-on. She took full responsibility, breaking down in tears, calling herself a monster during sentencing. Her voice trembled as she apologized, admitting the unimaginable pain she had inflicted on her family and on the entire Carnation community. But despite the tears and the words of remorse, Judge Jeffrey Ramsdell was resolute. The law demands a severe sentence for crimes of this nature. By mid-2013, after nearly 8 years of proceedings, Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe were officially sentenced to life in prison without parole. In his closing words, the judge underscored the sheer brutality of the massacre and the necessity of protecting society from killers as cold-blooded as they were.
Miss Anderson, the result is pretty much preordained. Ms. Anderson, pursuant to your convictions, the law mandates that I impose 6 consecutive sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of release or parole, plus a sentence of enhancement of 60 months on each count as well. I will impose the mandatory victims assessment penalty, the DNA fee. Restitution will be set at a separate proceeding, which you may waive your presence at if you so desire. I will waive all other non-mandatory fees and assessments, and that will be the order.
But even with justice served, the horrors of that blood-soaked Christmas night continue to haunt everyone connected to the case. The most heartbreaking part is that there are few left to grieve for the Anderson family, only a handful of close friends, and those who themselves were scarred by the tragedy. One of them, Linda, was forced to relive the pain again and again throughout the trial. On the witness stand, she had to recount every detail of the worst day of her life, etching a permanent scar into her memory. Carnation, a once quiet, peaceful town, was never the same again. To this day, residents still whisper about the nightmare inside that house at the end of the road. The trailer and the shed, where the massacre unfolded, still stand, silent and unmoving, like grim witnesses to a dark chapter that refuses to fade. A shadow still hangs over this place, something no one wants to talk about, yet no one can ever forget. So what do you think? Michelle and Joseph, did they deserve the death penalty? Or was life without parole the fairer sentence? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to uncover more chilling cases, don't miss the next video. I promise you won't want to look away.